Hello, I'm Mrs H. You can find my patterns at www.mrs-h.com. In today's video, we're going to be sewing the big bag, and I think you'll probably be able to guess why. This bag is, well, big. So the measurements for this bag, it finishes up at 17 inches wide, 11 inches high and 8 inches deep. That's 43 centimetres wide, 28 centimetres high and 20 centimetres deep. And here are a couple of finished versions that you can see. So they are fairly sizable. I absolutely love this bag. I mean, I love big bags anyway, but this one is a fantastic size. I took one to the bag retreat and I carried all of my personal things in it, plus my laptop, plus my charger, my slippers, bottles of water, etc. I had absolutely tons in it. I've got two different versions here. One has got slightly shorter handles. All you just need to do is take half a yard off of the length of webbing that's required if you want the shorter handles. Or I've got one with the original length handles, and that's just enough to hook over the crook of your arm while you're carrying it. Some people might be able to get it up onto their shoulder, but if you're wearing a bulky coat, then probably not. But that's a really nice arm carrying length. Or of course you can carry it in your hand. It's got these faux rolled handles with the webbing. And then this shorter length, if you just want to be able to grab the bag, then take half a yard off of the amount of webbing needed. That's 0.4 meters, and then divide the length of webbing in half, and that will give you these shorter handles. So each of these bags have been constructed exactly the same, just out of different fabrics. So they've each got a zip closure at the top, and this bag uses a separating zip. Oh, I've got a bit of padding in here, just take that out, just taking it out my shop window. So each of these bags has got a separating zip, which means that the bag opens really nice and wide. And that's a great, well, it's a perfect use for a separating zip. It's the absolute ideal zip to use. If you haven't got a separating zip, you can always use a slightly longer fixed length zip or a closed end zip and add a tab onto it. But if you want that really nice wide opening, then a separating zip is perfect. Now inside you'll be able to see there's a zip pocket, and that one's one of the ones that uses a facing. So there's a nice finish inside, there's no raw edges, and I've got a contrast colour on the inside of the zip pocket. I've got my regular striped lining on the front and then my contrast black on the back there. On the other side we've got a slip pocket in this stripe lining fabric, and I've divided mine. You can divide yours how you like. And then a full width slip pocket, and I've added a snap onto that. If you don't want to use any hardware at all, because that is literally the only hardware that this bag uses, then you can always leave that magnetic snap out and just divide your pocket. So you've got a really big, deep, full width pocket there with a slip pocket on top, or two slip pockets depending on how you divide it. Now mine's been sitting on the box, so it does look slightly out of shape, but actually this pattern is sized so that you get a really nice tight lining. There shouldn't be any baggy linings there. I'll pop this up again and show you the outside. All you need to do then is just close the zip, and that's all nice and secure in there. There is a firm stabilizer on the main panels and on the base, as well as a foam, and I'll show you in the pattern how to make sure that you don't get any wrinkles from adding your firm stabilizer onto the main panels and your base. And then there's just a foam in the ends to make sure that they bend in nicely. I think that gives it a really lovely shape. This version is exactly the same, but I just want to show you, I've used Cornish tartan for this one, and the way that the bag is constructed, you end up with a zip at the top that is perfectly pattern matched to your main panels. So the fabric for the zip closure is actually part of the main panels, and you can see it's perfectly pattern matched because it's part of the same fabric. Okay, so this one's exactly the same. I've got my zip closure at the top, I've got my zip pocket inside with my contrast fabric. I've added a bit of my tartan in there just to give it a really nice pop. I think that's a great extra feature. And then in this one I've got my full width slip pocket with magnetic snap, and then my zip pocket I've divided into 3. I've got 2 slip pockets there, and I've also added a pen slot in the middle there. This one's exactly the same. You can either use your bag open, unzipped, which makes it a really nice big basket size, or you can have it zipped up. This would make, I mean, perfect for market shopping, shopping day, an overnight bag maybe, where you don't want a traditional overnight bag style. This is such a useful bag, and I know that I am a fan of big bags, but I hope that you will be a fan as well once you make yours. So this video, I'm going to talk you through how to sew every step of the pattern. I'm going to talk you through the whole way. So grab your supplies and let's get started. Right, the first thing we're going to do is add our stabilizers. So you've got all of your fabric pieces, and we've applied interfacing to all of the relevant pieces, which I believe is actually all of the pieces. And then our Decaville or our firm stabilizer, the Decaville Light, is going to be fused onto the middle of the foam for the main panels, exterior main panels, and the exterior base. So you can see here I've just marked the centers of my Decaville Light and the centers of my foam, and I've lined it up and I fused that to it. Okay, so that Decaville Light is attached to my foam. Then what we're going to do with the Decaville Light on top, so sort of sandwiched in between the layers, I'm going to pop our exterior fabric on. Now this is actually my contrast fabric for my base, but we're going to do exactly the same for the exterior main panels as well. So you've got your right side of your contrast base, and then that's my interface back, and then I've got the Decaville Light fused to my foam, so that is acting as one piece. Okay, so that'll give us the firmness of the Decaville Light, but it won't add any wrinkles, and it won't wrinkle when we're turning, and there's no risk of it coming detached because it'll be sandwiched in between these layers. So what I'm going to do is just add a pin in the corner and then smooth out in the opposite direction diagonally across, and add a pin in this bottom corner here, and then add a pin in this top corner here, and I'm going to smooth down in the opposite direction again. And all we're doing is we're just basting our foam to our exterior pieces in the same way that you usually do add foam. The only difference is that we've got the Decaville Light sandwiched in between, just to give us a bit of extra sturdiness, because this bag is sizable, I think we'd all agree, and so you just need the extra little bit of stabilizer in there just to keep it nice and firm rather than sag. Okay, then all I'm going to do, I've got my stitch length on the longest stitch length, and I'm just going to sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's 6 mil all the way around the outside using my longest stitch length, my longest basting stitch. Oh, I've just shifted there, so I'm lifting my presser foot and just smoothing that out. So I've done that at 1/4 of an inch because that's going to be inside the seam allowance then. And it won't show when we make our bag. Now, because I went a little bit squiffy here, I didn't pick up my presser foot all the way there, and so my fabric shifted. So I'm just going to unpick that little bit and just smooth it out. And I've done this on the longest basting stitch. So this is for the contrast base. You'll do your exterior main panels very similarly, but I'll show you the only change with those, the only difference. Okay, right, I've unpicked that little bit. I'm just going to pop it back under and just redo that little bit so it doesn't shift. Okay, so now on the wrong side, what I'm going to do is just trim away this excess foam from the seam allowance so that we don't have that added bulk in the seam allowance. If your machine can handle it, then it's no problem, but I find it does give you a much better finish if you just take all of that bulk out of the seams, because they can sit a little bit flatter rather than, you know, sometimes they sort of roll in a little bit. I think that's probably just the added bulk pushing those seams out slightly. So all I'm doing is just trimming along these seam allowances, taking out this extra foam, and don't panic too much if you snip through your stitches. It won't be shown. The stitches are just literally to hold this in place during construction, and then the construction stitches are what will keep it in place long term. Okay, right, so that's my contrast base. So I've got, you can feel that's really nice and firm at this point. So I've got my exterior fabric and I've got my foam, and sandwiched in between I've got my Decaville light, but my Decaville light is fused to my foam, so you can see this fabric on top can just flow really naturally, and I don't have to worry about any wrinkles. You're going to do the exterior main panels exactly the same, or very similarly. Here's some I prepared earlier. The only difference is that your foam will end before the top. So this is my panel, this is the bottom edge of my panel, and when you pop your foam on, make sure it's lined up with the sides and the bottom edge of your fabric if you've got directional fabric, and then we're going to base that in place around the sides and bottom, leaving this top bit unsewn. And you can see I've got my Decaville light there fused to my foam. Okay, so again on the right side this feels really nice and firm, but the fabric can move quite freely and I won't have to risk any wrinkles. So repeat that for your other exterior panels. So I've got 2 exterior panels, both with my Decaville light and my foam, and 1 contrast base. Contrast base is covered all the way, and then the exterior panels, the foam doesn't go quite all the way to the top, and that detail is in the pattern as well for you with the measurements of where it should finish. Okay, so once you've prepared those, they can go to one side, and then the only extra bits we need to prepare are the side panels. So this is my contrast side panel and my foam piece here. There's no Decaville on this, it's just foam, and I've interfaced the back of my end panel. So the same as for the main panels, just going to line up the sides and bottoms. My foam is slightly bigger, but just ignore that because you'll have cut yours completely to size and it will match perfectly, and if it doesn't then you'll just trim it off like me. Okay, so I'm just smoothing this along, make sure it's nice and taut on this fabric, and I'm just pinning at the top of the foam here, so you can see that the foam doesn't go all the way to the top of the end panels, and this is because your exterior fabric or your contrast fabric will fold down inside the bag, and there'll be a little band around the top of the inside of the bag with this colour fabric or your exterior fabric and contrast fabric, and that's how we're going to add the zip closure. Okay, so the only difference from this and the main panels is just the lack of Decaville light. Everything else is exactly the same. I'm going to baste this on using my longest basting stitch, my longest stitch on the machine. I'm going to go all the way around. I'm just starting where the foam starts really. So I've sewn that using my 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance, because my seam allowance for the bag is 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre, so it will just be in the seam allowance by about 1/8 of an inch or 3mm, well 4mm if you're using metric. And that will just hold it in the seam allowance, but it won't be showing on the final construction. So I'm just whizzing around with my scissors, and I sort of like to hold my scissors at an angle, and then I just pinch the fabric back away from the foam and just trim all the way around there. Okay, lovely. Right, so then our end panels, both of those are stabilised. They've got the foam on them. They are ready to be used. So we'll just pop those to one side, and then we're going to get started on the zip pocket. Right, so the zip pocket, what we need is one lining main panel. Get all of my little bits and pieces here. We'll need one lining main panel. I'm using this grey fabric for mine. My zip is hugely too long because I didn't have a matching zip in a shorter length, so we're just going to trim that down to size, so don't panic too much if your zip is much shorter. You'll also need your your F1, F2 and F3, your zip pocket, top, bottom and facing. Okay, so this is my zip pocket top, the larger piece in the tartan, and this is my zip pocket bottom in the matching grey, and my facing is also in the grey. This is Cornish tartan, this is, so that's why I am using that, because my studio is in Cornwall. So what we're going to do, we'll pop the top and the bottom to one side for the minute, and on the wrong side of the zip pocket facing we're going to draw a box. So you'll need, I'm going to use pink, and in the hope that it shows up on the back of this facing. Yeah, that should show up pretty well for you on the video. So we're going to draw our box 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimeters from each long edge. So that's these long edges. So we'll draw our line 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimeters from this long edge. And that should give you a height of approximately 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter inside between those two lines. And then we're going to draw a line 1 inch from each short end, and that will form our box. Okay. Then what we're going to do is just draw a little triangle inside each end of the box, and then a line in the center to connect them. Okay. Don't worry too much if it's not completely centered, that's okay. Now I am going to just mark where the center of my pieces are so I can make sure they're all nicely lined up. And I'll do the same on my lining main panel. Now this looks much shorter than the exterior main panel. Don't panic, okay? It's supposed to be quite a bit shorter, but I know that it does look a little bit too short and like you might have cut it wrong, but don't panic, you haven't. It is how it's supposed to be. Right, so we're going to place this facing right sides together on top of the lining, and we're going to put this 2 inches or 5 centimeters from the top edge. So I'll try and do mine upside down so it looks the right way to you. So that's 2 inches, and I've got my center of my lining main panel there, so I'm going to line up the center of my facing and then add a pin at that end. Try not to move my facing while I do this, and then a pin at this end as well. Just double check I haven't moved that. No, that's great. Okay, and what we're going to do is we are going to sew around the outside of this box that we've drawn. So this pink box that I've got here. So I'm probably going to start around about here, and then I'm going to sew to this corner and stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot, sew to this corner, stop my needle down, lift my presser foot, pivot, put my presser foot back down again, and keep sewing. And I'm going to sew around the entire outskirts of that box, so the whole box on the outside there. Ignore these triangles and the line for the minute. I'm going to sew using my regular stitch length, which is for me is around 2.5, 3-ish. As I approach these corners, if I think that I'm not going to be able to make it exactly to the corner, then I can always reduce my stitch length right down so that I can end exactly in that corner, and then increase it again to carry on sewing. We just want to make sure that we're quite accurate around the outside of that box. Perimeter, there we go, not outskirts, perimeter of the box. There we go. Right, so I'm going to line up on the line of that box, and I'm going to start my needle down so that I know that it will end with my needle down. I think managed to meet the corner there exactly, so that's great. Right, I haven't quite, so I'm going to reduce my stitch length down and get right to that corner. There we go. And then I can increase my stitch length again. Okay, so I've just overlapped a few stitches there at the end, and I've sewn all the way around the outside of the box. Now I'm going to, just before I do anything else, I'm just going to steam press these stitches to make sure that they are nice and sunk down into the fabric. Just got a little board here. I'm just going to give those a little steam. I'm also going to, I'm going to do all my pressing before I cut it, I think, just to make sure it's nice and neat. So all I'm going to do is just pull this facing up and press along the line of it. And then I'm going to do the same from the other side. And I'm going to repeat that on the two short ends as well. There we go. Right, so what I'm going to do now is just snip through that centre line as far as the triangles and then cut through each arm of each triangle so I can get right into the corner there on this box or on this facing. So I'm just starting by cutting along this centre line. To the triangles, and then I'm going to snip out into each arm of the triangle and just get really close. Try not to cut through your stitches in the corner there. Just go as close as you can. Sometimes I find this is much easier to turn it over and then you can see a little bit easier exactly where the stitching is without having to decipher between the drawn lines. So that's quite accurate in that corner. Go into this corner now. It's a little bit easier if you can lift it up quite close to you to look at, which obviously I can't do because I'm on the video at the moment, but if you're able to, then that is a little bit easier. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're just going to pop this facing through the hole that we've made. Just give it a little tug from the back to encourage it out. Just a little tug. And then we're going to give this a nice little press just to encourage this facing round to the back so it's nice and flat on the front. Now it is inevitable that you will get some creases when you are doing a box like this, but by pressing from the right side, pressing from the front, it will mean that your creases are more likely to be on the inside, on the facing, and not so visible in your finished bag. So if you know that there's going to be creases, and there probably will be creases, we all get creases, if you use a facing like this and you press from the right side, then you know that those creases are going to be on the insides. And if people are looking inside your zip pocket for any creases, then they probably should be looking in your bag to start with. Okay, so I'm going to press from the right side. So I've finger rolled that as best I can, but it's still popping through. So I'm just going to finger roll and press as I go. If you've got a particularly bouncy fabric, you can always press and then clip it or pin it just to encourage it to stay in place while you're working. Quite often just a little bit of a steam press does the trick though. Right. Turn that round so that I can see what I'm doing on this other side. And I just go all the way along this facing and just make sure that that's really nice and neat from the right side. Okay. So on the wrong side, you'll find that's where your creases are, so you can give it a nice little press from this side as well if you want, just to make sure that is all nice and neat on the right side. Now I'm going to pop this to one side until we need it, so I am just going to leave it clipped, just because my fabric is a little bit bouncier and I just want to make sure I've got a really nice neat finish, and I know that my clip marks won't show on this fabric once it's cooled down. So I'm just going to add a few clips, a few strategic little places, just to make sure that stays nice and flat. Right, so I'm going to pop that to one side for the minute. That's my zip pocket facing and my box done. That's nice and neat. So I'm going to pop that to one side while I work on the rest of the zip pocket. So what we need is our zip, number 3 zip. Yours will be much shorter than mine. In fact, let me trim it down now to the size that it says on here. Right, and I'm going to cut it so that I know I don't have any of these metal ends or stoppers on my zip, just because I want to know where they are. And if I'm cutting the end off, I'm just going to sew across the bottom to make sure that my zip pull doesn't come off. Okay, so let's have a little measure and check I've got the right length before I cut it. Quite often I do this measure twice, cut once, and it's still wrong. So let me double check my pattern piece, or my pattern again. Okay, now this is the trick, to make sure that your zip pull is inside the bit that you're going to cut off, because you don't want to cut this off and find that your zip pull has gone with it. Right, there we go. Now I'm going to add a little dab of fray check to the cut ends there on mine. If you're using a zip that is the size that the pattern calls for, then you won't have to do this. Right, lovely. Okay, so what we're going to need is our zip pocket. Let's see what we've got. Zip pocket bottom, so that's your shorter piece, and it's in striped fabric on the pattern. Mine is grey fabric here. Let me turn my cutting mat over, because that's not going to be very easy for you to see. Put it on this lighter side here. Right, so here's my zip pocket bottom, and you'll need some basting tape, some double-sided basting tape, and the zip. So we are going to add our basting tape and our zip to the upper edge on the right side of the zip pocket bottom. Okay, so that's your shorter piece, zip pocket bottom, and we're going to add it onto the right side. Okay, you can see that's my right side. This is the interface side. And if you've got directional fabric, then you'll want to pay attention to adding it to the upper edge of your pocket rather than the bottom edge. Otherwise, whatever your design is will be upside down. Okay. I'll just take the backing paper off of there and add my zip. So you'll notice that my zip is also right sides up. Well, that fits perfectly. Great. So I've got my, oh, hang on. I've put this on the wrong way round. Whoops. Hang on. Right, the trick to this is not to do it upside down so that people watching the video can see. Okay, so we'll add the tape to the upper side. That was correct. But I did put my zip on the wrong way round. Okay. So my zip will be right sides up. That's correct. But my zip pull will be to the right, whereas I had it to the left. So I'll do it the right way up for me, and then I'll turn it around and show you. That might be the key. Okay, so there we go. So this is my top edge, and I've got my zip pull on the right there. Okay, I have to try really carefully not to pull that zip pull off. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stitch this into place using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, using my regular stitch length, and I'm going to go along the whole length of the zip from one end to the other, and I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. Okay, and then we are just going to give that a little press. So we're going to fold it back. And give it just a gentle little press. So your zip, the right side of your zip, should be on the wrong side of your fabric. If it looks like that and it looks wrong, don't worry, that is correct. Okay, lovely. Do that zip up slightly. Trying really hard not to pull my zip pull off there. A little bit more of a press. There we go, lovely. Right, so now we need our zip pocket bottom, no, zip pocket top, sorry. And again, if you've got directional fabric, then just pay attention to the top and the bottom on the pattern. So we're going to add a line of double-sided basting tape to the right side of the upper edge, and then turn it 180 degrees so that the upper edge is on the bottom. So if you've got directional fabric, pay attention to that. Okay. So add it to your upper edge, and then turn it 180 degrees so that the upper edge is on the bottom. So that's the bottom facing you, okay? Don't know why I pointed, because you know where you are. Just take the backing paper off of that one. And then we're going to add the zip onto there. I'm just going to turn this around so I can see what I'm doing. We're going to line up all these edges, raw edges, sides and bottom. Make sure they all line up nicely. Okay. So that's how it should be looking to you. So we've got our fabric right sides together and the zip right sides on the interfacing side, and we're just going to baste along there. Sorry, we're going to sew along there, not baste. The same way we did before with our scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Right, so we can give that a little press as well, same as we did before. So this might be the moment where you start panicking, you start thinking my zip is on the wrong side. Don't panic, this is how it should be. So the right side of your zip should be on the wrong side of your fabric, and the wrong side of the zip should be on the right side of your fabric. There we go. Right, that looks lovely, nice and neat. Okay, so wrong side of my zip, right side of my fabric, right side of my zip, wrong side of my fabric, and you should have your zip pull to the left and your larger piece on top. Then we're going to retrieve our lining panel with the zip pocket facing attached. If you've left it clipped, then unclip that now. Going to add some double-sided tape to the back of this facing around the outside of the box. On the top and the bottom. And then we're going to add our zip pocket to this. So I'll just take the backing paper off. Right, so what you're going to do is with the zip pockets or the zip pull to your left, just going to pop this over the top and make sure that these edges line up. I'm just going to pull it towards me slightly so that I can make sure that that's nice and neat inside the box. A bit hard to do at a distance. And then I'll show you what it looks like on the reverse as well. So you just want to make sure that that zip is nicely even in that box window there. Okay, so on the right side, you've got your right side of your zip showing through that gap, and then on the reverse you've got the right side of your zip pocket top. So the top, the bigger piece should be on the top and the bottom there. Okay, now all we're going to do is sew around this box. I'm going to start here-ish because I find it's not so noticeable, and I'm going to sew to the corner again, same as we did before, and then around all four edges, shortening my stitch length if I need to get right into the corners nicely accurate and nice and neat. I'm going to start with my needle down. Okay. So I'm going to try and maintain my 1/8 of an inch 3mm seam allowance around the outside of the box. Change my stitch length as I need to be able to be accurate for that. Okay, and back round to where we started. So you can either do a couple of back stitches or you can leave your thread tails long and just tie them off. I've done a couple of back stitches. Trim this extra thread. Right, so check it works. It works, excellent. Move your zip pull to the middle so it's out of the way. And then on the back, we're just going to bring the top down to meet the bottom. Now don't panic about where this is positioned versus your lining panel, okay? It will be slightly overlapping or just about the same sort of length. Don't panic because we've got to add the base on to our lining panel yet, okay? So I'm just going to add a little pin in these corners. Then I'm going to add a double pin here on the bottom of this straight edge to remind me to leave a nice big turning gap. In fact, I might need to leave bigger than that. Let's go a little bit bigger. So just do double pins to remind me. And then I'm going to add a pin onto the side and this side, and then at the top there. So I'm not adding my pins through the lining layer, you'll be able to see, just through the pocket layers, okay? So flatten that all out, nice and neat. And then we're going to sew this on our regular stitch length. We are going to sew from the top only through the pocket layers. Okay, so you can either fold your lining back like that, or you can sew from this side and fold your lining back like this. So we're going to sew from the top edge, back stitch at the top, and we're going to sew to the start and end of our turning gap. So I'm going to back stitch at the start here, sew to here and back stitch. And then I'm going to change my stitch length up to my basting stitch, my longest stitch length, and I'm going to sew across that turning gap. What I'm going to do then is decrease my stitch length back down again and do a little bit of back stitch there, carry on to the corner and up to the top. So there'll be back stitch at the two tops here and to either side of this turning gap, and then there'll be basting stitches along the bottom of the turning gap. Just using my regular seam allowance for this. So I'm starting my regular stitch length, back stitching, and I'm pivoting at the corner there. I'm at my double pins, so I'll back stitch here. And I've just done a few back stitches just to be sure that that opening is nice and secure. Then I'm changing up to my longest stitch length. And back down to my regular stitch length. And then I'll pivot and back up to the top. Okay, so I'm going to take these pins out, and then I'm going to give these basting stitches a little steam just so I know that they have been steamed. But I'm going to leave them in until later. I'll unpick them later. But by basting across that seam, that turning gap, sorry, it just means that when we come to remove them and turn the bag through, we'll have a nice little stitch line to follow, and we'll have a nice straight closure inside our pocket. I know it'll be inside our pocket, but at least it'll be nice and neat. I'm just going to steam those stitches there. If you want to, you can fold these back along this stitch line. That also helps with a nice neat finish. And the same on the other side. Okay, lovely. Now there's one last thing to do before we say that this zip pocket is done, and that is to open our zip all the way and leave it open. But if you just have a little peek inside your pocket, you'll be able to see that you've got that contrast fabric, that exterior fabric, inside your zip pocket, and it just looks really lovely and neat and an extra little feature. I think that looks great. Oh, I was going to close my zip then. Right, don't close your zip, so leave that as it is until later. We're going to work on our slip pocket next. Okay, the next thing we're going to work on is the slip pocket. So you should have 2 slip pocket pieces, and these will be the same fabric as your lining if you followed the cutting out chart. I've just added my little label here onto the side of one of the slip pocket pieces because I always forget to add it, so I'm trying really hard not to at the moment. So we're going to pop these right sides together, match up all of these raw edges, and then we're going to sew around the outside, but only 3 edges, so 2 sides and 1 top, and we're going to leave the bottom open. We don't need to sew the bottom edge at all because that will be within a seam allowance. Okay, just add a few clips to make sure that it doesn't shift while I'm sewing it. So I'm going to use my regular seam allowance out of my regular stitch length. I'm going to sew from one bottom corner. I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to sew up to the top and leave my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot. So along the top, do the same and back down to the bottom there. Okay. One more little stitch, I think. There we go. Lovely. I'll take that pin out before I forget that it's in there. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're just going to trim these top corners and the bottom corners, just trim the seam allowance. So I'm going to cut straight across, and then I'm also going to cut a little bit further into the seam allowance with a longer triangle just to remove any bulk out of that corner. So straight across and into the seam allowance, and then on these bottom corners just going to remove a long triangle of fabric out of the seam allowance there in the bottom corner. Okay, all we need to do now is turn it right sides out and give it a nice press. Just turning my corners first so I can make sure that they are nice and turned through. And then I'm just going to run my hand along the inside, along that seam, just to push it all the way out. Okay, lovely. So I'll give that a little press. Just want to make sure that that's a really nice, neat finish on the front here. And along the top. And all the way along the top there. And then on to this second side. Now I'm not sure how great my label does with heat, so I'm just going to add a little cloth over the top just to protect it. Just notice that I've got a bit of pink on my finger there from the zip pocket facing. Please don't worry that I'll cut myself. Okay, so So now all we are going to do is top stitch along the top edge. So I'm going to use a slightly longer stitch length for that. As long as I remember to turn it back down again, it shouldn't be a problem. And I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil away from the edge on the side that I want to be the right side. What we need now is one of our full width lining pocket D. So that will be your piece that is not the same as your lining. So mine is my exterior fabric I'm using, and we're going to pop this on the right side. Right, oh, we're actually going to need to mark the centres so we can make sure it's all lined up evenly. Let's mark the centre of this piece, and then I'll mark the centre of this one as well. Okay, so all I'm going to do is pop this slip pocket on top of my full width pocket, matching centres and bottom raw edges. Just going to clip along this bottom edge to hold that all in place where it needs to stay. Take those pins out before I lose them. Forget they're in there. Add another clip. Okay, now if you think that that slip pocket is a bit too large, you can divide it at this point. Okay, so have a look at that and think about the things that you want to put into your slip pocket. Now I think I want mine to be the right size for my phone, so let me get my phone, just pop that in there. Which side? Oh, I don't know which side to pop it in. Right, let's have a look. I've added a chain onto it because I keep losing it, so just ignore that. Right, so I think if I divide mine at 5 inches from the edge, that will be plenty for my phone. So let's just add a chalk line in there, I think. If you wanted to add a pen, then I would recommend about 1.5 inches for your pen. Let's do that actually. Let's add a pen slot, why not? Add that into the middle. And then you can divide it up how you wish really. You can just customize it to your needs if you want to divide it, or you can leave it full, you know, the full width. Okay, so all we're going to do is we're going to sew this in place. So I'm going to start at this top corner here, and I'm going to backstitch to make sure that that is nice and secure. I'm going to backstitch that a couple of times, and then I'm going to sew down here to the bottom. I'm going to use my 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil seam allowance all the way to the bottom, and then I'm going to sew along the bottom to my first line that I've marked. If you haven't marked any lines, just go all the way to the end. I'm going to leave my needle down, lift my press foot and pivot, and sew up this first line, backstitch, pivot and turn back down, so back down to the bottom, carry on to the next line, leave my needle down, lift my press foot and pivot, and so up this second line, backstitch at the top, pivot and sew back down to the end, and then up the last end again, backstitch at the top there. And I'm going to use my slightly longer stitch length, my back stitching, my top stitching stitch length, which for me is just slightly longer. Okay, so I'm turning around and pivoting, so I'm back down on that same line. Okay, to the next line. And then up the next line. Back stitching a few times there, and then pivot and back down again. And then back up the final side. Okay, lovely. I'm pleased I've divided that actually. I think that'll be quite useful for me. So I can just rub out these chalk marks. I'll get a spritz of water in a minute and rub these out properly. And trim these extra threads off. So this will be on the front of your full width pocket. This is not all the pockets that there will be. You've got your full width pocket as well. Right, so we can pop that to one side for the minute. Just double check that you have actually got your openings at the top of your pockets. And we'll need our second full width slip pocket piece. So that's your piece D, and we're going to add a magnetic snap into there. So we need to mark the center as we did before, and it's handy that actually my center is more or less in line with my tartan. I think that's great. Add a pin in there, show where it is. Yeah, great. Okay, so we need a magnetic snap. I'm going to place it 1.5 inches or 3.8 centimeters from the top of the panel. You only need one magnetic snap, but I'm using Emmeline snaps, which come in packs of 2. And pop one to one side. Okay, so I wonder whether yes I did remember to bring a scrap of foam. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to measure down 1.5 inches from the top of this panel, or 3.8 centimeters, along the center line. I've got it there, and I'm going to add sorry, let me double check. This says the center of the snap 1.5 inches, so I need to mark that there, and then that's where I'm going to pop the center of my washer. So let me just double check that I've measured that correctly. Yeah, great. So now I can mark my 2 prong lines and cut through those. Just going to make tiny snips with my scissors. And then I'm going to add a little dab of fray check to make sure that that doesn't pull. It feels very peculiar to be adding a magnetic snap to what is essentially my exterior fabric, but that's what the pattern says. So that's what we're going to do. And it's funny because I wrote the pattern, so I should know. Right, the male half we need, so that's the one with the sticky out bit. I'm going to pop that through those slits there. Add a little scrap of foam stabilizer. And I'll use washer. Have I lost my washer? There it is. Just to mark where I need to cut those. I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm just going to use my little scissors to cut a snip through. Oh, I don't think they've got quite the same amount of strength because the handles are soft for my poor joints. Right, there we go. So I'm going to add my scrap of foam stabilizer and then my washer. And this is a trick you don't see everywhere. I'm just going to get my little teaspoon and use that to bend the prongs in. It's really, really, really easy to bend prongs in with a teaspoon. So that's what I do. I just keep a teaspoon in my sewing kit now. Right, and we're going to add a little scrap of duct tape onto the back, just to cover those prongs and make sure that they don't rub through to anything else. Okay, right, I'll pop that in with my pins so I don't lose it. Okay, so now we've got our full width lining pocket there with magnetic snap. We're going to match the raw edges of both of our full width lining pocket pieces. Okay, so we're going to match them together. All of the raw edges match together, but we're only going to sew along the top edge. Okay, so double check that your pieces are all nicely lined up. Add a couple of clips to hold them in place. And then we're just going to sew along the top edge. So make sure when you're doing this that the edge with the bottom of your slip pocket is not the edge that you're sewing. Okay, so you want the edge with your magnetic snap to be at the top and the top of the pockets to be at the top. So we're going to sew this using our regular seam allowance and our regular stitch length, just the top. And I'm back stitching at the start and the end. Okay. So what we're going to do now is turn it right sides out. So I'm just going to turn it right sides out, or I'm going to open it up rather and push against there. Just ignore the fact that my checks don't quite match up. They're not supposed to match up on this one. I was sort of running out of fabric a little bit. Didn't want to waste fabric on pattern matching. So I'm turning it right sides out. And I'm going to press along this top edge to make sure it's turned out really, really nicely. Just going to finger roll along that seam to make sure that the seam is as I want it to be. I just give it a little steam press. And I'm pressing from the right side so that I know that the the back of this is tucked away. It's not quite so important if you're using a solid fabric, but if you're using a print, then it will be seen. Pressing along that top. Okay, and then we're going to top stitch along this top edge using our slightly longer top stitching stitch length and sewing at 1/8 of an inch or 3mm from the edge, the top edge there. There's no need to back stitch on this one. Go all the way to the end. Okay, that looks lovely. I'm pleased with that. Great. So what we're going to do now is get our second half of the lining main panels. Remember, the first one's got the zip pocket in, so we want the second lining main panel. I'm going to mark my centres before we start because that's going to be needed. Just use a pin to mark it, I think, and then I know that we're in the right place. And I'll do the top and the bottom just so I can make sure everything is nicely lined up. Okay, so we're going to add the second half of the magnetic snap into this panel, and we're going to put it with the centre of the snap 2.5 inches or 6.4 centimeters from the top edge of your lining main panel. So if you've got directional fabrics, pay attention to that top edge. Okay, so 2.5 inches and along the center. So before I mark this, I'm actually gonna place that where I think it needs to go, there, and I'll add a little bit of chalk just in case it moves anywhere. And then I'm going to grab my full width pocket and just place it on top of there and make sure that that is the right place for all of my edges lining up. Yes, it is. Great. Okay, so that's only important really if you just want to double check your cutting or your positioning. You want to make sure that everything lines up nice and smoothly. It's an extra step, but I do think it doesn't hurt just to take that little extra step and be sure that everything lines up before you actually position it. I'm just going to snip through those lines, same as we did before, add a dab of fray check. And then pop my snap in from the right side. There's my washer, I need a little scrap of foam. To go on the back of this. And this is exactly the same as we did for our magnetic snap before. Okay, and my trusty teaspoon, move that out of the way, sorry. Just gonna bend that down. So I love a teaspoon because you can put your thumb in the rounded side, get a really good press on it. There we go. Okay, Obviously don't use your best teaspoon for that. You don't want grandma's silver being used to do magnet. Well, you might, I don't know. My grandma didn't have best silver, so I'm just using a regular teaspoon out of the drawer. And then a scrap of duct tape over the back just to protect those prongs from rubbing through anywhere. Okay, what we're going to do now is add our full width pocket on there. So give that a snap it together, and then make sure that this is nice and straight. So I'm just going to double check. Yep, that looks straight. And adding a few little clips in here just to hold that in place while I sew. Add a couple on this side before I start shifting anything around. Okay, now I've got one layer that's slightly longer than the others, so I'm just gonna trim that from this side. I don't know if I've got my rotary cutter up here. No, I haven't, so I'll just trim it with my scissors for the minute. I just want to trim it so that I know exactly where to sew, so I can use the right seam allowance. Okay, there we go, lovely. That all lines up perfectly, so I don't know how I managed to have a little bit extra, but that's okay, nobody will know about it except for us. Okay, so I'm going to sew along all three edges. I can just use my basting stitch for this because it's not going to be seen, it's just to hold it in place, ready for final construction. So I'm going to start from the top here. I am actually going to back stitch at the top either side just to be sure that it's nice and secure. So I'm going to start at the top here, back stitch, sew to the corner, pivot all along the bottom and then back up to the top. I'm just going to back stitch just to make sure that it's nice and secure. I'm going to use my 1/4 inch seam allowance to make sure that it's not shown in final construction. Just do the shot slightly, so I'll go back one. There we go. Doesn't matter if you overshoot in the seam allowance, that's fine. Okay. Now if you wanted to save on hardware, you could actually leave that magnetic snap out and just divide it in half, which is what one of my testers did, and have two larger pockets. Right, I think that's great. Brilliant. Actually, let me, before I take that pin out, let me mark the centre there, and then we've got that for later. Okay. So by my calculations, that's both of the lining panels complete and ready to construct the lining. So you'll need your panel with your slip pockets attached and your panel with your zip pocket attached, and we're going to finish the lining construction now. So get a hold of your lining base, and we're going to add this onto both of these lining panels, so one either side. It doesn't matter which one you start with. Oh, before we start though, let's definitely mark the center of the base, because we'll need that when we come to our final construction. Mark it on the wrong side on this one. But when we come to add those end panels, we'll be grateful for these markings. There we go. Okay. Right, so all we're going to do is place one lining panel, so this is my one with my pockets on top of the base, matching all the raw edges, and it should match the whole way along. If it doesn't quite, then match the centers and then trim it down so that it matches. This one matches perfectly. And we're just going to sew along that one edge using our regular stitch length and our regular seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch. Let me just double check. So we are supposed to be leaving a turning gap in the middle of one edge. So I'm going to leave that in the edge that's got the zip pocket, because that's how we're going to close it later. Okay, so in this one with my slip pocket, I'm just going to sew along the entire length of that seam. Okay, that looks great, excellent. Okay, so all we're going to do now is add the second lining panel, and that's the one with a zip pocket attached. So make sure your zip pocket is just out of the way there. I might pin that up out of the way so I know exactly where it is. Now remember, your bag, this is the base of your bag, so the top of your slip pockets is here. You need to make sure that the zip pocket is up here, the other side, so that you sew the bottom of the lining panel onto the base. Okay, otherwise you'll have a very, very, very short zip pocket, which if you want a very, very short zip pocket would be absolutely perfect, but if you don't, then it would be a bit of a pain. So just add a few clips, and then I'm going to sew it along this. Now I need to remember to leave a turning gap of, let me see what it says, at least 12 inches or 30.5 centimeters in this base. So let me measure that. So my ruler is slightly longer. That'll be around about there-ish. Use my double clips again to around about there-ish, but if I can go bigger, then that's great. Just slightly bigger. You want enough on either end to be able to attach into your the end. You don't want it to go too close to this side seam. Okay. So I'm going to start sewing from the end using my regular stitch length, my regular seam allowance, and I'm going to back stitch at the start. Okay, and I'm at those double clips now, so I've just stopped. I'm going to back stitch a few. And then I've increased my stitch length up to the longest stitch length, and I'm going to sew across this turning gap. So I know we've already got a turning gap in the zip pocket, but we're going to turn the whole bag through this turning gap in the lining. So decrease your stitch length back down again, and then we're going to close that using this turning gap in the zip pocket. So once you've decreased your stitch length back down again, let's do some back stitching and then carry on to the end. And back stitch again. Okay, so we're going to close this turning gap using this turning gap in the lining, but we're going to turn the bag through this longer turning gap in the line, in the main sort of lining seam. Okay, right, just finger press those open a little bit, be a little bit easier to add then. So let's have a look at what we've got. We've got our base in the centre, got our slip pockets here with the openings on the opposite side to the base. Got our full width slip pocket and then the smaller slip pocket which I've chosen to divide. And then on this side we've got our zip pocket, and the zip is still open on that. Okay, so these panels are ready to sew into our lining end panels, so that's what we'll do next. Right, so we've got our finished lining and we've got our end panels here. I've just marked the centre of my end panels, and what we're going to do is we are going to match these centres of our end panels to the centre of our base. I'm just going to add a pin because this is one place that I don't want it to shift. Okay, and then we're going to add a pin, or we're just going to connect the top of our end panels to the top of our lining main panels. Just make sure they match. Okay, and then we're going to do the same on the other side, so the top of the lining end panel to the top of this lining main panel. And add a pin. Okay, so we're connected in 3 places there to give us the shape. So all I'm going to do is just go round, work my way round, and just ease this in around this curve. I'm going to work on the side of the lining main panels rather than the end panels. I'm going to pin, but if you prefer to clip, then do go ahead and clip instead. If you want to open your seam allowances, then that will give a nice neat finish. If you don't feel like that's possible, then that's okay. Just go with what works best. So I'm just pinning down the straight ends first. All of these nice straight sides. And then to ease this in around the curve, I'm just going to cut a few little snips into the lining main panel in the seam allowance, just to allow that to curve around the end panel. So this is actually on the base, lining base, which is now part of the main panels. Just snipping into the seam allowance all the way around. And then I'm just going to ease that in place. It's a little bit hard for me to show you this on camera with it being such a big bag, but I'll do my best, and I'll move it into position afterwards so that you can see as well. Don't really think this through when I designed these bags. I thought it'd be a great size bag from a practicality point of view. Didn't think about my filming space. Okay, right, so that's one half eased in. So all I've done is I've just pinned that into place around this curve. Okay, I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side of the curve. So I'm just snipping into the seam allowance. I've lost my snips because they're disguised so well on this fabric. And I'm just making sure that I don't snip further than the seam allowance. You can draw your seam allowance on if you want to be a little bit more certain. So I'm just, again, easing this around the curve. Lovely. Okay, so all I need to do now is sew this into place. So I'm going to start at the top edge and I'm going to back stitch here at the top edge. I'm going to start with my regular seam allowance and then I'm going to taper after about 1 inch. I'm going to taper to a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm going from 3/8 of an inch, which is 1 centimetre, to a 1/2 inch, which is 1.2 centimetre. I'm going to sew all the way around this curve back to the other side, and once I'm near this second top edge, then I'm going to go back to my regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to sew with my end panel on the bottom, just so I can control where any puckers are if I can sense any coming. So just make sure that this fabric is nice and flat as you go under the presser foot. Don't worry about it too much before or after. But under the presser foot is important. Okay, so now I'm going to start thinking about tapering back, so when I get close I can taper back to the regular seam allowance. Okay, right, let's take these pins out and double check from the inside before we trim anything. Want to make sure that everything's looking as it should inside. So all you're going to do is just have a little look inside and double check that that is all as it should be. Yep, looks fine to me. Okay, and once you're happy with it, get yourself your pinking shears, or if you haven't got them, then just cut some small notches into your seam allowances, and we're just going to trim around the curves. Oh, still got a pin there. Can trim around the curves with our pinking shears. I'm just going to trim all the way around. Oh, I've got another pin. I think that's where I tried to open my seam allowances and I obviously forgot by the time I actually got to them. There we go. Okay. So just double check that now that you've trimmed it. It should sit nice and neat inside. That's great to me. And then all we're going to do is add the second end panel exactly the same way. So match up, first of all, the centre of your end panel with the centre of the base, and then the top of the end panel with the top of the lining main panels, just so I get that thread there before it ends up inside my finished bag. And then the top on the other side. Okay, and then I'm just going to pin down these straight edges here. And same as we did before, just ease this in around the curve. You can use clips if you prefer to staple round curves in the seam allowance, then you can go ahead and do that. A bit more straight edges, and then I'll clip into my seam allowance just to ease it around. Oops, lost a pin. That's the benefit of a wooden floor, I suppose, isn't it? That you can hear a dropped pin, or you can hear it bouncing away from you. Right, that looks fine from that side. So let's do the second side, second edge. So we'll do the straight edges first and then ease it in around the curve. Same as we did before. Starting to become a bit easier to handle now, isn't it, as we sort of wrestle it into place. Go along the straight edge there, and then I'll clip into my seam allowance here, just to allow me to ease it in. You only need to clip the seam allowance or snip the seam allowance of the lining main panel. Well, the lining base, I suppose it is really, isn't it? End panel shouldn't need clipping. Okay, there we go. Right, so we're just going to sew this into place, same as we did for the other side. So we're going to start off with our 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and then taper to a 1/2 inch back stitch at the start and the end. Okay, I think that was even neater than the first time, so that's great. Obviously older, so wiser, because I've added an extra, I don't know, 4 minutes onto my life. Either that or practice makes perfect. Okay, so again, before I trim that, I'm just gonna double check it from the inside. It's great from the inside, I'm happy with that. So I'll give it a little trim with my pinking shears around this curve. All the way around. And then I can double check it again. Yeah, great. Okay, so we've got the interior of our big bag done. All we need to do now is add our zip onto the top, and then our inside is done. Right, so I have marked the centres and I can still see them, so that's lucky. Just mark the centre on the lining side, oh sorry, the wrong side, that one, there we go. So what you'll need next is obviously your lining that we've just finished and your continuous zip. You'll also need a hand needle and a thread. So I'm going to go and get those, and then we'll do our zip. We'll add it onto our lining. Okay, so what we're going to do with this open end then is we're going to fold these seam allowance, or these zip tapes, sorry, at a 45-degree angle, so that the fold of the zip tape comes up to meet the zip teeth. Okay, let me hold it that way, you might be able to see it a bit better. Okay, so I've done mine so that hang on, I'm trying to do it back to front for me. There we go. I've literally just folded it so that the zip teeth go off at a 90-degree angle. Just folded that zip tape at a 45-degree angle, and you can see the zip tape on the back there folded over. So once you're happy that you've got a nice neat fold, and I'm usually happy when I can see that the fold of my zip tape is running right along the bottom of those teeth, and then I'm just going to add a few hand stitches just to keep it in place. Now you can machine stitch this, but this is one of the few things that I do hand stitch so that it doesn't shift about while you're stitching it into place, because I think a nice neat end to a zip is very important for a professional finish on your bag. These stitches don't have to be particularly neat because they're not going to be seen, they'll be in your seam allowances, which is a good job because mine are not particularly neat. Okay, so we've got one side folded over and held into place. So I'm going to do exactly the same on this second side. I'm just going to fold this and make sure it lines up. Yeah, so I've just folded that exactly the same as I did for the first one. The fold of the zip tape is directly underneath the zip teeth, and a few stitches to hold it in place. Just double check that those match. Yes, they do. Great. You want a nice neat end to this zip, I think. There we go. So to mark the centre, match up the stopper at the end, which is not really a stopper because you can open it, and the zip pull, and fold that in half. And I'm just going to use a bit of white chalk just to mark where the centre is there. Should hopefully show up a little bit better on this black zip. Okay. There we go. Now this is dead easy, and separating zips on bags are so easy to use. As long as you've got them in the seam allowance, that's all you need to worry about. So all we're going to do, decide what you want to be on the front and what you want to be on the back of your bag. So I want my zip pocket on the back. So I'm going to position my zip on the panel with the zip pocket with my zip pull to the left, because that's how I want it. So however you position it, that's how it will be in your finished bag. Okay, so just take a minute to double check that it's in the facing the direction you'd like it to be. So I've matched up the centre and I'm just clipping along the zip now into place. Okay. Right, so in theory you should have the same amount of space at the end after your stopper as you do before your zip starts. So just double check that, and if you need to wiggle it along then you can. Great. Okay, so all we're going to do is just sew this into place, and you can baste it or you can use a regular stitch length. I'm going to use a regular stitch length just for a bit of added security. I want to know that zip is not going anywhere when I finish the construction. Swap that for a pin. Okay, so I'm going to use my regular stitch length and I am going to sew that using, let's see if it says on the pattern which seam allowance. Yeah, a 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance. Now I'm not sure if I'll be able to do this with my regular foot on, but I'll have a go and see. So the beauty of this zip is you can literally just unzip it all the way if you need to. You don't have to worry about keeping the two halves together. Okay, and then all we're going to do, and this seems a bit too simple because things are usually more complicated than this, all we're going to do is just attach it to the other side of the lining, like so, matching the centres again. We'll go all the way along. I'm going to use pins this time actually because it was a bit awkward with the clips coming out. Now if you find that the other half of the bag is getting in the way, then you can just unzip the zip, do what you need to do, and then re-zip it together. As long as you have got the centres in the same place and matching, then you should be all okay. I'm going to go all the way to the end with this one. Now, I know that I've matched that up fine, so I'm going to unzip this underneath my pins just to give me a little bit more space to work with. Okay, so I'm going to baste it on, or I'm going to sew it on rather, exactly the same as I did before. Back stitching at the start and the end again. So you can leave it like that, or you can zip it up and double check you're still happy with it. Make sure you take all the pins out, top tip there. Just going to zip it up. The beauty of a separating zip is that you can open the bag up really, really wide then. Okay. So that's what our lining will look like in the finished bag. So that looks great. I'm happy with that. And I'll be able to open my bag up all the way then. Great. Right, let's get started on our exterior then. Okay, so first thing, we need our webbing. So cut your webbing into 2 equal lengths. I've sealed the ends of my webbing using some glue because I'm not confident that it will melt very well. Otherwise I would have melted it, but I've used glue just to make sure that it doesn't fray while we're using it. So I've cut my webbing into 2 lengths. They're both exactly the same, and I've sealed the ends of both. We just need to find the center of our webbing now. So fold it in half, match up the 2 short ends, just smooth along to find the center. I'm going to mark that with a pin for the minute. And then we're going to mark 5 inches or 12.5 centimeters either side. So that'll give us 10 inches in total that we're going to mark. So let's line that up on my center. And use something that you can remove, because this will be visible in the end. Right, mark my center as well. Okay. What we're going to do then is we're going to fold this webbing together to match the long edges between the 2 marks and the center. So what I like to do is fold the center first, and you can pin that or clip that, and then fold all the way along these long edges until you get to that mark. Okay, there I am at the mark. Let's see if I can pop a pin in there as well. Just, my webbing's a little bit thick for pins, but I can just. So then we'll go the other side as well. Just work our way along, just pinch it together until we get to that second mark there. Let's see if I can pop a pin in this side. Okay, so I should have 10 inches of sort of rolled handle-ish, sort of faux rolled handle. And we're just going to sew between those 2 marks just to form this rolled bit of webbing. I'll do the second piece as well, and then I'll sew them both together. So I'm just double checking if there's a right or a wrong side to my webbing. I'm not sure if there is. Okay, so fold it in half again. And there's my center. And then 5 inches or 12.5 centimeters either side. Okay, so we'll fold this in half, match up those 2 centres, and then you know your handle's not going to be a bit squiffy. And I'll just clip along the whole length of this 10-inch section again. same as we did before. You can do this kind of handle on anything really if you want a sort of a grippy bit, something to grip onto. If your strap or your handle is slightly wider than you'd like it to be for comfort, you just add a little rolled section in. Okay, just try and have my pin in. Okay, there we go. Now, if that wasn't the most riveting thing you've watched, I don't know. But anyway, so I've marked my sections that we're going to stitch, and you can use whatever stitch length you feel comfortable with. I'm going to use my construction stitch length, so for me that's a 2.5 ish, and I'm going to sew. Now it does say to sew between the 2 marks. It doesn't say what seam allowance to use. I would sew as close to the edge as you can. My webbing has obviously got these cream bits along the side, so I'm going to try and sew just on the edge where it meets the black, because I think that would be really obvious if I do any wonky stitching if I don't get it on the black bit. So where you're starting, do a few little back stitches. You want that to be nice and secure, and then sew between those 2 marks and back stitch at the other end. Okay, right, I'll just double check that before I take my pins out. Yep, that looks great. I did manage to get it on the black, and you can't even see the stitching, so that's very, very fortunate. If you've managed to match your thread colour to your webbing, you might be able to get away with that as well. Okay, so there's one of my handles. You'll find it wants to sit a certain way, so if you work out which way it is happiest sitting, I think the other way, then that's the way you can put it onto your bag. So I tend to find out whichever way it's sitting most comfortably, and then leave it that will be the right side up. Then you can pop that to one side. Right, do my second section. All of these clips, and it's just such a short section, but I wanted to be sure that I had them straight. Didn't want wonky bits. Okay, great. I think I've managed to stay on the black on that one as well, so that's good. Right, so see which way this one's falling. Oh dear, the end of my pin has fallen off. That's no good, is it? I have to pop that in my sharps bin. Okay. So is it that? No, this way. Sitting this way. Lovely. Okay. Right, so what we need next is our exterior main panels that we stabilised earlier. So for me, that's my tartan that I've got here. Now remember, when you're working with this, the bit without stabiliser, do you remember, because the foam is a bit short, that's the top of your panel. Okay. So we're going to line up our webbing on top of our panels. And we're going to line it up from the bottom, so that's where the foam stabilizer is attached. Okay, so we're going to place them matching the bottom raw edges and make them 2 3/4 inches or 7 centimeters from the center of the panel. Now, did I mark my centers? I did. That is excellent. So this red line is my center. I can't see my pink pen on a red line. That is my center. So now I'm going to mark 2 3/4 inches from the center here. And pop my handle just about there and lining up the raw edges. Now I think actually that the most sensible solution is maybe to glue these, in which case I need to find my glue, which may be in my sewing bag. Just have a little rummage. Can't see it. Right, I might have to put you on pause while I nip down and find my sewing glue, and come back to you in a second. Right, pretend I never went away. Okay, so I went and got my glue and I've glued these down at 2 3/4 inches or 7 centimeters from the center. I'll just double check before that sets. Yeah. Okay, I've also added some pins just to make sure that they don't go anywhere. Now we're going to sew from the bottom to the top and back down again. So we need to mark where we're going to stop sewing. That is also in the pattern, and that is 2 1/2 inches or 6.4 centimeters from the top of the panel. So just mark on line your ruler up with the edge of the fabric, and then just mark that on your handles where you're going to stop sewing. Around about there-ish, except maybe straight. Okay. Right, lovely. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to sew from the bottom here. I'll back stitch, and I'm going to try and sew on the black bit, so it probably won't show very much, but I'll use my top stitching stitch length just in case it does show. I'm going to stop when I get to this line that we've marked here, 2 1/2 inches from the top. Stop my needle down, pivot, and sew across, and then down the other side. If you want to add a rivet, then you can do in the middle here, but I've gone hardware light on this bag, so I haven't added any rivets on this one. Okay, so you're going to want to sew at about 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil away from the edge of your webbing. I'm going to sew on the black bit so that my stitches don't show. Okay, that's one handle done, or one side of one handle done. Take these pins out. And then I'm going to sew the other side of this handle, and then I'll do the other panel as well. So I'll take these pins out, and then I'll do the second one as well. Just giving that little rub so that any pin marks disappear. I think that looks quite good actually, that webbing. I think that was definitely the right choice. Okay, so we pop that to one side and do the second panel. Exactly the same as we did for the first one. Oh, except I forgot to draw my lines on this one. Hang on. I'll have to do it a bit last minute. Okay, either I forgot to draw my lines or they've rubbed out. Oh, and I've got a pin right there. Let's move that pin out of the way before I start sewing. Let's take those pins out, and then we'll do the other side. Then that'll be our handles done. Nice and easier. Much easier than sewing fabric handles, isn't it, using webbing? It's great. Okay, there we go. Right, let's take those pins out. Great, lovely. So as I said, if you want to add some rivets in to the straps, then you can. That would work quite well. If you're going hardware light like me, then you don't need to. Okay. Now what we're going to do is add the base. So retrieve your exterior base, or your contrast base rather, that we stabilised earlier, and we're going to sew the base onto the bottom of this exterior main panel. So in theory you can just match up all of the edges, so you can match the centre. And I'm just going to clip it all the way along there. And then we'll sew this and turn it right sides out. Okay, so I'm going to use my regular construction stitch length and my regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. Oh, that looks lovely. Okay, so fold these back and press your seam allowances open. Now for this one where I've glued my webbing, that is not going to go open. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave those seam allowances towards my base, and then I'm going to sew on the base. Well, it says to sew either side of the seam, so that's fine. You can do that if you prefer. I think I'm just going to sew on my base side to keep all of those seam allowances together in the one place. So I'm going to increase my stitch length up to my top stitching stitch length. And I'm going to pop this under the foot. Now, as I'm going, I'm just gonna double check underneath that everything is still where it should be. Right, that's kept those seam allowances down great. So I could stitch on the other side as well. Yeah, I will do that. The pattern calls for it, and I don't see why not. There's no good reason not to. Keep everything nice and neat. Okay. Actually, do you know, I think it looked better without. Might do without on the other side and just use this as the back. Right, so all I'm going to do now is attach the other exterior main panel. So remember, you want your the bottoms of your handles to be facing the other panel, and that's the side that we're going to attach onto our base. Okay. So right sides together, and we're going to match up along that long edge again. Oh, let me take my pin out. Right, so I'll use my construction stitch length, the same seam allowance, our 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. Okay, right, all we need to do now is top stitch. If you've managed to press your seam allowances open, then do it on both sides. If you haven't and you're pushing them towards the base, then just sew on the base side. So I'm going to start here. Oh, increase my stitch length, well remembered. I'm just going to make sure that my seam allowances are pushed down. Okay, lovely. Right, so that's our exterior ready to turn into a bag. We just need to add our end panels now. Unfortunately the camera angle is not very big, so you can't see it in its entirety, so I'll sort of swoosh it along so you can see it all the way. But you've got your base in the middle, your contrast base in the middle, and your exterior fabric with the webbing handles, and once you sort of pull it up you can see the shape that it's going to be. Except it'll be right sides out, won't it? This way. You can sort of see the shape that your bag's going to be. And this is the point where you think, this is quite a big bag, isn't it? Right, so next thing we'll do is add our end panels onto this. Right, so now we need our contrast end panels, and I've just marked the centres on mine, top and bottom, in the seam allowance. So we're just going to match up, same as we did for the lining. Oh, hang on, now I know I marked the centres, but they seem to have disappeared, so let's just mark those again. So we're going to match up the centre of the end panel to the centre of the contrast base. So if your centre marks have disappeared, like mine, just add those on again. There we go, that's a little bit better. I know this is quite a sizable bag to be dealing with, but it's a very usable size actually. It's just a bit difficult to do in a tight space. So just add my centre marks on there. Great, okay. Right, so let's start again. So what we need to do is match the centre of the end panel to the centre of the contrast base. Okay, now I'm actually going to add a pin in here just to make sure that that does not move. Okay. And then you can pin along a bit if you want, but what I'm going to do first is match the end, the top edge of my exterior main panel to the top edge of the contrast end panel. Okay, so I've got the tops joined together there, I've got my centre joined together, and I'm going to do the second exterior main panel top. This is exactly the same as it was for the lining. It's slightly taller, and we're just going to have to ease our way round slightly more because it's so much taller. So on this one, I would recommend pinning or clipping and then hand basting or staple basting before sewing. So that's a decision that you'll need to make, whether you want to do that or whether you want to just pop it under the machine. I just find that it's so big. I like to take a little mind wandering break partway through and then I lose track of where I am. So I find that if I hand baste it, it at least sort of stays in the right place. Okay, so I've pinned down one side. I'm just going to pin the straight edge on the bottom here, and then we can start easing that extra curve in. Right, so same as we did on the lining, I'm just going to snip into the seam allowance of the base, contrast base that I'm using at the moment, and we'll see whether we need to snip into the seam allowance of the exterior. I think it would just be the base though, maybe a little bit on the exterior. There we go. And all we do is just ease that around that curve so it sits nice and flat. There we go. Okay, lovely. So it might look a little bit wrinkled, but as long as it is sitting flat actually on the seam line where you're sewing that into place, then you'll be okay. You won't have any puckers. So I'm just going to do the same on this side. And then we can ease it in. So hopefully you'll find that your foam matches. So where your foam is on the end panel, that sort of joins up to where your foam is on the exterior panel as well. Okay. Lovely. I'm just doing this at a slightly odd angle because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing, and it's too big for me to lay down, so just trying to make sure that you can see where I'm going with my pins. Okay. Right, so I think we're nearly at the point where I have run out of straight sides. So now I'm going to snip into my seam allowance again. And then ease it around this curve. I'm just snipping all the way around here because it's quite a nice long deep curve here. Snipping all the way in. Just give me that extra little bit of leeway when easing around. Okay. Right, once you're happy that that is all clipped or pinned into place, then I'm going to hand baste that into place, and then we can do exactly the same on the other end as well, and then we're going to pop it under the sewing machine. So I'm going to pause you for a minute while I just hand baste that into place, and then I'll come back to actually pop it through this sewing machine. Right, so I have gone round and hand basted my end panels on. We're ready to pop it through the machine now. So I've just hand basted in the seam allowance on both of these end panels, just to keep them in place when we're sewing it on the machine. Okay, right, I'm going to use my construction stitch length, that's my regular stitch length, and I'm going to use my regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, you've got two options. You can either sew it with the end panel up, and this is slightly easier to get through the machine, or you can sew it with the end panels down. It's slightly trickier, but you can control any puckers, because if you get any puckers, it's going to be on this main panel side rather than the end panel side. So I'm going to go for end panel down in the hope that I will be able to control any puckers that are coming my way. So we're going to back stitch at the start and the end, and as I said, we're using our regular seam allowance, and we're just going all the way round. So as you get to a point where you need to rearrange your hands, just stop your needle down, and you can rearrange it then. Make sure that it's nice and flat on that section that is going through the machine. And the beauty of hand sewing is that as I got to these corners, that did not shift at all. My layers stayed exactly where they were supposed to be. Okay, so I've just popped my hand inside and I'm feeling around this seam now to check that there's no puckers. I can't feel any puckers. Let's have a little look. It looks okay. Looks completely fine from that side. Okay, so I'll do this second end panel and then I'll trim the first one. So I'm going to sew it in exactly the same way, and you'll notice as I was sewing that first one, I just squash the bag, manipulate that fabric out of the way, however you need to be able to sew this with it flat under the foot. quite sure what happened with that one. The first one was so much easier than that second one. I think I obviously got ahead of myself there. Right, so I'm just going to double check around here, run my hand around the inside and check what's going on before we do any trimming. It feels a little bit peculiar in that corner, so I'm just going to turn it out and have a look and see what's going on. Don't worry too much about your stabilizers puckering or looking creased at the moment. Don't worry, we'll give it a final press when we're finished. Okay, that actually looks fine to me. It just looks a bit creased, so that's okay. Don't know if you can see that there. While I'm here, I might as well just double check the other corner as well. I haven't missed anything or got any puckers. No, great. Okay, so once you're happy with both of your end panels, we'll just give them a little trim with our pinking shears, same as we did on our lining. Just reduce the bulk in the seam allowances and help that to sit nice and flat. If you haven't got pinking shears, then just go ahead and snip some little triangles into the seam allowance just to help that fabric sit a little bit neater. Okay. Nearly done, and then we'll be ready to pop it all together and finish our bag. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so what we need to do now is turn this right sides out, and then we'll be ready to put the two bits together. I'm just going to go ahead and turn this exterior right sides out. Don't worry about your stabilizer creasing. We'll give it a nice steam press after we're finished, which should help. But the benefit of adding it onto the foam rather than onto your fabric is that any creases will hopefully not be on your fabric. They'll be inside between your layers. Okay, so just double check all around these seams that you're happy with them. This is the point where you think, gosh, this is a sizable bag. It is. I think I might need to take my bag on an outing because it's so big. Nice outing. Right, so what we're going to do is retrieve our lining, which I've got here, and we're going to pop the two of them together. So we're going to match them right sides together, matching the top edge by placing the exterior, which is right sides out, inside the lining, which is wrong sides out. This will be a real big squash because the exterior is slightly larger than the lining. So if you prefer, you can do it the other way around. I'm going to try and attempt it this way round though, because this is the way that we've managed to do it on the step photos and the tester bags and things. So hopefully my fabric choices today won't hinder me, but that's what we're going to do next. Right, so to do this, I just need to work out, have I got a right side? Oh yes, I did that extra line of stitching on that side, didn't I? So I'm going to have this as my front, and I wanted my one of my zip pull to the left. Right, so I'm going to pop that inside there, making sure that my zip pull is where I wanted it to be. And give it a real good squash down, tuck those handles in. Okay, now as we match this together, we want to make sure those seam allowances are open if possible. So match your seam allowances first. So where they meet, I'm just going to open those up as best I can. Add a little pin in there, and then I'll do the next seams, so these hopefully should match. Don't worry too much about all this extra fabric, just pop it down inside, push it down inside and match up these seam allowances. Oh, except I can't, can I? Because my hand basting is in the way. Let me just snip my hand basting out of the way. I forgot about opening the seam allowances there. Let's open those, there we go. That's the benefit of hand basting, I guess, is you can just unpick it when you're done. Now, in theory, this top of these end panels should match, and they do. So I'm going to go ahead and pin those while I've got them here. As long as it all matches up on the top, don't worry too much about all this extra bulk in there. Right, so let's do, oh yes, let me take this stitch out from my hand basting here so I can open the seam allowances and open these out and match and pin my seams there. And again on this final seam, just going to match and pin those together. We're just going to work our way around the entire top here. So we'll check that these end panels match. Yep, they do. Great. So I'm going to pin those while I'm here. You just need to squash all of that extra fabric down inside so that it matches up along the top there. Okay, now for the main panels, I've marked my centres. So what I'm going to do is match my centres together first and then work my way around the main panels. So that one matches pretty well. I'm going to go in the middle-ish of that main panel with a pin. Divide and conquer with this one. Okay. Now I've got my zip there, so I'm just going to add an extra little pin in there just to make sure that stays in place while we're sewing it. I don't want that to shift around. I can finish this. So again, just tuck those webbing handles down. This is a lot easier if you do it the other way around, but I find that when you turn it through, then you need to turn it through and then turn it right sides out, whereas I prefer to do it this way, so I've only got to turn it out once. Right, so I'm 3/4 of the way there. So I'll match up my centres first. I'll pin that. And then work my way around the top here. Just pinning as we go. I'm going to pop this on the machine in a minute. Now if you've got a free arm, this will be super duper easy. Just stick it on and away you go. If you haven't, if you've got a flatbed like me, then you'll want to just position it so that you're sewing sort of inside the bag almost. If you've got an extension table, then you'll find it really, really helpful to use. So I'm going to grab my extension table because it will just balance the weight of this bag and stop it pulling down to one side. Right, so I'm all pinned. I'm just going to grab my extension table and then we'll sew around the entire top. We're going to use our regular stitch length and our regular seam allowance. Right, I've added my extension table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew with my presser foot inside the bag like this, okay? So decide where you're going to start. I'm going to start actually on the other side, which is the back for me. And we're going to sew using our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So line yourself up, get yourself all sorted, and then start with your needle down, because this will mean that if you need to adjust and move your hands, then your needle will stay down. Now something I forgot to mention, when you get to your zip pull, we're going to have to move that out of the way. So let me just stop there a minute. We need to open a turning gap so that we can move that out of the way. Right, let's open our turning gaps now. I should have done this before I started, apologies. Right, so we've got a turning gap in the bottom of the pocket. So I'm just unpicking that. Just going all the way along that turning gap there. And that might be enough to allow us to move the zip pull out of the way. Let's have a look. Yes, it is. Great. So I'm actually going to move the zip pull to a bit where I've already sewn. Oh, hang on, I think I'm stuck on a pin somewhere. There we go. So that zip pull is out of the way. We know where that is. Great. So we can carry on then. So I'm just going to go back to where I stopped and just overlap a couple of stitches and then continue on. So as we did before, don't be afraid to just move your fabric out of the way however you need it to be, so you can get access to where you need to sew. Okay, I'm just going to take that pin out there because that's in an awkward place for me. I guess I could have hand basted this as well, which would have made this a little bit easier, but we all know how I feel about hand basting. Okay, now we're going around. I'm just going to remove some of these extra pins because they're a little bit sharp. Okay, so just move this out of the way. Okay, I'm nearly back to the start now. So again, I'm just shifting everything out of the way. So that what I'm sewing is nice and flat. Right, we're back to where we started. Okay, so let's take these pins out and then I'll double check it before we go any further. I think hand basting and not having pins would have made that a lot easier actually. So you don't have to worry about not catching yourself on the pins. Okay, we're nearly there. Very nearly. Take all these pins out. Right, let's have a little look and just double check that everything is as it should be. Looks okay. So now I can take my extension table off so I've got a bit more workspace on this sizable bag. Okay, so now I'm going to unpick this bottom seam. So we've unpicked the zip pocket and that's great. Double check, yep, my zip is still open because I forgot to check. So now I'm going to unpick this bottom seam here. I'm going to go all the way along. That's just the basting stitches that we added between the two sets of back stitching. Right. Okay, so before I turn this out, I'm just going to put my hand in and run my thumb around this seam, or run my fingers around the seam at the top, just to double check that that is all as it should be. Feels okay on that side. Double check this side. Yeah, right, feels fine. So all I'm going to do now is just pull this out through this hole in the bottom of the lining. Just easy does it. Nice and easy. So before I close any turning gaps or any seams, I'm just going to again double check that everything is as it should be here on the outside. Yep, that looks fine. Got an extra thread there, take that out. Right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to reach through the zip pocket to pull out these lining panels where this turning gap is. Okay, so just pull it out however you need to so that you've got access to that lining seam. And all we're going to do is just match up these two seam allowances on this lining seam, and we're going to close that by sewing it as though it's just the regular lining seam. So I'm just pinning along here, matching these up. We'll be able to sew along the original line of basting stitches that we did then, and then it will be completely invisible from the wrong side, from the right side, sorry, or hopefully. Okay, so I'm just going to pop this under the machine, again using my same construction length, stitch length. I haven't changed my stitch length at all, and I'm starting where that back stitching is. So I've sewn along that original line of basting stitches, and I've backstitched at the start and the end and overlapped slightly, just so we know that that hole is no more. It's completely secure. So you can then tuck that back inside your bag and double check that that looks completely fine. Yeah, I don't think anybody would ever know that there was a turning gap there. Okay. Right, the next thing we need to do is just reach in, make sure your seam allowances are still open around these 4 seam allowance areas. And then we're going to tuck this down along. You'll be able to feel there's a line of foam inside that you've got there. Okay, and just going to fold along that line of foam and add a clip. So you should find that you've got around about 1.5 inches or 3.8 centimetres of exterior fabric showing on the inside once you've folded it down. Okay, so we're just going to go all the way round and do that. So I'm just going to reach through just in a few strategic places to make sure that I'm nice and even all the way along. Now when we come to top stitch, I'm going to top stitch with my handle up like this so that we catch the handle in the top stitching just for a little bit of extra strength in that. Right, so that's one side. Work our way round the end panels and then the other side as well. So if you're not sure on the end panels, reach through again and just fold along that line of foam that you've got there. Okay, quite pleased with this so far. It looks pretty good, so I hope that you're at the point where you're quite pleased with yours as well, because you can get a real good feel for how it looks now. Okay, right, so for this second side, just reaching through and folding along the line of the foam, and I'll do the same on this side as well, just so I know that's nice and even all the way along. Do either side of the handle, I think. Now mine is maybe a little bit easier because I've got this tartan. I can double check that the lines match up. Oh yeah, mine goes along a line of check actually, that's quite handy. So I can just follow that. That's actually really handy. I should do that for all bags that I make. Except then it does rely on me cutting them straight, doesn't it, to start with. But for this one, works great. Okay. Right, so where am I up to? I've just got one little bit on the end panel there to clip down. And these end panels here as well. Don't worry too much if it's looking a little bit creased. We'll get to that once we press it. If you feel more confident to press along the top before you clip it and sew it, then that's also a great idea for a really neat finish. I'm just going to go for it though on this one. And then I'll give it a final press afterwards. I don't think I could get many more clips on there. And I'm going to have to take at least a couple of clips out so I can start sewing. Now if you've got a free arm, what you can do is just pop that on and sew all the way around. Now I haven't, I've got my flatbed. And I want to know that I'm sewing on the outside of my bag. So frustrating as it is, I'm going to turn this inside out so that I'm sewing on the exterior fabric of my bag. And we're just going to sew around the entire top of the bag. It doesn't have to be all the way out, as long as I know that my top edge is flat, then that's fine. Right, so where shall I start? I think I'm going to start somewhere a bit unobtrusive, so probably on an end panel somewhere around about there-ish would be good. So I'm going to increase my stitch length slightly to my top stitching length. I'm just going to double check that I've got enough bobbin thread. Yes, I have. Just before we start top stitching, because that's my usual speciality. Start top stitching and then realise I haven't got enough bobbin thread. Okay. So I'm going to get my extension table back again, so that I've got something to rest the weight of the bag on. Oh, I've lost the leg somewhere. There we go, that's better. So I'm going to be sewing at 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the top edge. And I'm going to start on my, where the seam is for my end panel there. I need to lose that clip as well, just so that it's a little bit more hidden. Start with my needle down. I'm just going to take my time sewing around the top. I'm going to make sure that my handles are caught in my top stitching. Okay, so as I'm approaching my handle, all I've done is flatten the webbing down so that as it goes under the foot, the webbing will also go under my foot along with the fabric. Okay. Once that comes out from under the foot, you'll see that. I'm going to carry on sewing round. Okay, so just manipulate this bag however you need to be able to get that under the foot. So we're just going all the way round until we get back to where we started. Right, so that was fairly painless. So we're doing okay. Take my extension table off again. I won't need that again, so I'll pop it out of the way. Right, excellent. So I'm just going to double check where I've sewn, check I haven't gone wonky or missed anything before I close the turning gaps. Okay, looks all right from this angle. Does it look all right from your angle? And then we'll, well, we can turn it out, or while I've got mine inside out, actually, I think it would be easier to do this now. So before I turn mine right way out, I'm gonna just pull the bottom of my zip pocket out. If you've got yours right sides out already, then just reach through and pull your zip pocket out so you've got access to it. Just trim that extra thread there. And then in theory, your seam allowances should fold under quite naturally from that line of basting that we took out. So just fold along that stitch line. And that's where we're gonna sew. And I'm just gonna use a close top stitch. So as close to the edge as I can get without going off the edge. If you're a hand sewer and you like a really nice neat finish, then a ladder stitch would be absolutely amazing on the bottom of this zip pocket. Although it will be inside your zip pocket, so it's only for yourself or the recipient of your bag that you'll be doing that. Right, so all I'm going to do is whiz along the bottom of the zip pocket. Okay, just close that turning gap there and take my pins out, and then I can tuck that back inside, and then I can turn my bag right sides out again. Now if you had if you left your bag right sides out for top stitching, if you've got a free arm, then you won't need to do this. Yours will already be right sides out and you can just spend this time admiring your bag. Okay, so I just want to make sure that that's all pushed right out into the corners. So just make sure that you're pushing these curves all the way out, and that's the only way you'll end up with a not baggy lining, because your lining should fit nice and tight into the bottom there, as long as everything is pushed out really well. Okay, so check your zip pockets all good. Yep, do that up, and then we can do up our top zip and we'll be ready to go. All we need to do is line it up, zip it up, and now what I like to do is I like to just tuck these ends in like this, just to help them sit nice and neat. You don't have to, you can leave yours sticking out if you like. I like to tuck mine in, and that gives a really nice profile at the end there. Now I do need to give my bag a final press, that is true. I need to give it a good steam press because it is a little bit creased. But overall, I'm pretty chuffed with that. I think that looks great. I think it's a great size bag and I'll be able to fit a lot in it. The fact that it's got a zip closure at the top in the same fabric, and of course your pattern matching looks exceptional because it's the same fabric that you've taken from your exterior over into your zip closure. So it looks like you've done that really well. Well, it looks like I've done it really well. I'm sure it looks like you've done it really well as well. So without any extra effort at all, our zip closure looks very professional. So I'm really chuffed with that. I hope you're really pleased with your bag as well. If you want to add extra rivets into the top or extra feet or anything, you can. That would also work. But I quite like that this is very light on hardware. It's not a small bag, it's a big bag, but I think for its use, it will be quite a satisfying sew for you. So I can't wait to see what you make. If you do choose to make one, please do share it with me, tag me, send it to us at mrs.h@mrs-h.com or tag us at Sewing Patterns by Mrs H. I'd love to see what you make. Thanks for joining us.